Hi, I'm Briana Hetherington.
I'm Jenn Hatcher.
And I'm Kat Gottlieb.
Welcome to the Conscious Creator Community Podcast. We are over the moon excited to share our wisdom, experiences, and valuable insights to becoming the best version of yourself.
And that raises a more uncomfortable question. What if the feeling of growth is sometimes part of what keeps us from growing?
Wait, can our brains actually make us feel like we're making progress when all we've done is prepare?
Oh, yeah. But there are two different things happening. When we're curious, the brain's reward system becomes active while we're still waiting for the information. Then once we've heard an idea enough that it becomes easy to recognize, we can mistake that ease for mastery. So an insight can give us the emotional payoff of progress before there's any behavioral proof that we've changed.
So let me make sure I've got this. I can make the plan, color code the plan beautifully, announce the plan, and my brain is already throwing me a tiny parade because who doesn't love a parade and extra glitter?
A tiny one, yes.
Yeah, and then saying, well, that really resonated with me. Maybe the beginning of the work, but it's not evidence that we've done it.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit though. Are we making the brain the villain every time we don't follow through?
No, the brain helps explain why the shortcut feels satisfying. It doesn't remove our responsibility to move beyond it.
And sometimes it isn't a follow-through problem. Sometimes we know exactly what to do. We just don't want to pay the price that doing it would require. Hey, friends, welcome back to the Conscious Creator Community Podcast. I'm Kat Gottlieb, author, artist, and lifetime entrepreneur who has been there, done that. I am fascinated by the mind-body-soul connection and living the most consciously, mindfully as I can, and helping you all out on the journey too.
I'm Jenn Hatcher, a busy mom, fintech founder, and lifelong student of why we do what we do. Breaking patterns, that's my jam. And I've spent enough time untangling my own patterns to know that self-awareness is equal parts deep, hard work sometimes, brutal honesty with yourself and others, and being able to laugh when you catch yourself doing the exact same thing that you swore you had outgrown.
And I'm Briana Hetherington, founder and entrepreneur of Calm Water Bath, Altruistic Advisory, co-founder of Win Now Network and Finish Line Strategies, and a mentor, leadership, and mindset coach. And I want to ask, are we making the brain the villain every time we don't follow through, Jen? Because research has been trying to answer it for decades. And what they keep finding is our brains don't automatically reward us for knowledge. They reward us for what becomes familiar.
I'm going to start with a slightly different direction right now with this question. What if we're not afraid of change itself? What if we're afraid of the person we have to become if we actually lived what we already know?
Ooh, okay, Kat, I love that question, but can you take us a little deeper? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Look, the truth, it's not easy to change. I think we can all admit to that. And here's an example. So we know that we shouldn't eat junk food, right? But then, one day we're just having one of those days. And the first thing we do, we grab comfort food. If we say we want to get healthier, then we wouldn't grab for the food to eat our emotions. But guess what? Life isn't always easy, and changing makes us have to rewire our impulses and coping mechanisms. So instead, we have to rise to the immediate moment when we're looking in the freezer for that pint of ice cream, justifying it because, well, of our emotional state. But the healthier, stronger version of us knows we are self-defeating by indulging in Ben and Jerry's. The healthier version of us would close the freezer door and instead process our emotions with a quiet walk or a talk with a friend or a meditation or simply journaling. So changing takes so much at the beginning when we're trying to rewire our responses to make better choices. It can be more difficult even when we know better.
Isn't that the truth, Kat? And what Kat is describing isn't really about ice cream, although I do love some ice cream.
Kind of want some Culvers right now. Like,
That
let me
sounds
just put that out there.
It's really about what happens when a long-term goal runs into an immediate emotional need. In that moment, the brain isn't calmly asking, what choice supports the person I want to become? It's asking, what has changed this feeling quickly before? One human study shows how quickly stress can pull us back towards a practice response. Researcher Oliver Wolf found participants learned actions connected to different food rewards. Researchers then made one reward less desirable by letting participants eat it until they were full. The control group adjusted its behavior. The participants exposed to acute stress were more likely to continue the response they had already learned, even though the reward was no longer available. That's one study. And stress doesn't affect everyone identically, but it does demonstrate something important. Under stress, a practice response can be much easier to access than a thoughtful one. Stress doesn't reveal what you know. It reveals what you've practiced.
Which explains why we don't usually struggle with these decisions when we're well rested and having a glorious day. It happens when we're exhausted, we're hurt, we're overwhelmed. And the better choice asks for energy that we don't feel like we have.
That is it right there. The freezer, in our ice cream analogy, is simply where an invisible negotiation actually becomes visible.
And then, my dear friends, we make it worse by turning one choice into a complete character assessment. Now we're not someone who had a hard day. We start judging and shaming ourselves, and now we're someone who has no discipline.
Yeah, but the healthier version of us really isn't standing there in judgment. It's the version capable of recognizing compassionately what we need and remembering that we have more than one way to meet that need.
Oh, well said, Kat. And here's what the ice cream example that Kat talked about becomes so much bigger than food. A behavior doesn't have to create pleasure to become reinforced. It can become stronger simply because it removes something uncomfortable. Psychologists call that negative reinforcement. Negative doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It means something was removed. If eating temporarily reduces sadness, the brain learns that eating worked. If saying yes removes the immediate guilt of disappointing someone, the brain learns that saying yes worked. If taking over reduces anxiety, the brain learns that control worked. The long-term result may be regret, resentment, or overall exhaustion. But the immediate result was relief. And immediate relief is a powerful teacher.
So the brain can decide that worked long before our learning and the rest of our lives receives the consequences.
Yeah, it records the relief before our life receives the invoice.
Oh, okay. And friends, some of those invoices are expensive. I have a story. Recently, someone asked me for breakup advice. And so I'm doing a whole series on it. But here nor there, as I was talking to her, I realized I knew this one really, really well because I had lived it. So, I found myself texting an ex when I knew I shouldn't. Not recently. This is past. I just want to call that out. This is a past story. Today I have zero interest in interacting with any of my exes, and that is the beauty of a healthy relationship. Going back to the story, previously, I found myself texting an ex when I knew I shouldn't, right? Agreeing to dinner just as friends, telling myself it was harmless, it was mature, and it was even going to bring me that desperately needed closure. But what it actually gave me was a few hours when I didn't have to feel the loss, the finality of it, the hurt. And then the invoice came. I'd replay the dinner. I'd analyze the text. I was wondering if that door is still open and what does this look like and where are they at? And that whole mind path that happens. And every time this would happen, I would interrupt my healing all over. And it's like you're ripping open that gaping wound again. The dinner wasn't giving me closure. It was giving me temporary relief from the grief. I didn't have to feel mean. Again, I didn't have to face the finality, and I didn't have to sit in that uncomfortable silence we had talked about earlier. Quite honestly, I paid for it, as most people do, with more confusion. And sometimes the thing that soothes you for 5 minutes is the exact thing that keeps you hurting for 5 more months.
Oh, I can so relate to this, Jen. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I can feel the emotions
Uh-huh.
with it. And this is such a clear example of negative reinforcement. You were only texting him or having dinner. You weren't only texting him or having dinner. The contact was temporarily removing what no contact forced you to feel. That grief, the loneliness, and the ending and closure of a relationship. So your brain learned contact brings relief. That's why stopping the communication isn't the entire solution. Once the contact ends, the feelings it was postponing are still there, and they may initially feel even louder. The healthier response has to answer a more specific question. When grief creates the urge to reach for this person, what will I do instead? Because until a new response can meet some of the need the old one was meeting, the old pattern will keep making a very convincing case for itself.
So perhaps the person we're becoming isn't someone who never wants comfort. It's someone who can remain present long enough to ask, what kind of comfort do I actually need?
Ooh, An urge can tell you what you're feeling without deciding what you do next.
Oh, and this
Yeah.
is where identity enters the conversation. Psychologist Oysterman's research on identity-based motivation shows that we're more likely to take actions that feel consistent with who we believe we are. When an action fits our identity, difficulty can feel meaningful. When it doesn't, the same difficulty can feel like evidence that the behavior isn't for someone like me. The person who always says yes may identify as dependable. The person who always takes over may be known as the capable one. The person who never asks for help may have spent several years being praised for being strong. Changing the behavior can feel like risking the qualities that made us valuable.
Ooh, I feel and know every single one of those
Same.
and had to abandon every single one of those to become a better version of myself. Abandonment in other people's eyes, not mine.
Mhm.
So, the practical instruction might be set the boundary. So easy, right? Or the identity level challenge is becoming someone who can survive another person's disappointment. And I can tell you from experience, their feelings are not your responsibility.
Woo, exactly, Jen. Or the instruction is ask for help. But the
Ouch.
identity level challenge is become someone who no longer measures strength by how much they can carry alone.
Maybe we're not afraid the next version of us will be weaker. Maybe we're afraid we'll no longer be valuable for the same reasons. Bree, does knowing the science make you immune to this?
Not remotely. I think, yeah, not remotely.
Okay, this is such an important distinction. Understanding why we respond a certain way will help us notice it sooner. But eventually, the new identity does need evidence.
Ooh, okay. This feels like a been there, done that kind of moment. So, Kat, was there a version of yourself you knew you needed to become, but you resisted because you understood what it might cost?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, during my dark years, AKA, post divorce, I did a lot of growth and transformation that I didn't even know I needed. I reached a place where through all of that, I felt like a failure, right? Because it was rubbing up against all of my identities. I can do it. I am capable. I don't need anybody's help. In that part of my life, I was carrying the heavy load of everything in the marriage. I was a primary breadwinner. I was raising the kids. I had a custom built homemade that I designed. Like I was carrying it everything, and there was a certain amount of ego, or I guess identity attached to being that very, very capable person. But when I decided I could no longer do all of that, I felt like a failure.
Mm.
And the thing that I learned through the healing process, once I was willing to admit I couldn't do it and had to disappoint all the people in my life who was very used to me doing it all. Finally, after many, many months of really, it was a dark time. So if anyone listening to this, letting go of your old identity can be a big challenge. But once I released it, I couldn't believe how good I felt. Like, I don't have to know all the answers. I don't have to do everything. And yeah, I make mistakes. And like now I can admit I make mistakes every single day. I do stupid things. I no longer feel that like ego or pride of never admitting to the fact that I don't know everything. But it was such a relief when I could finally let that go.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to layer on that with a deeper question that I haven't prepared you for. So through all that, you kind of answered this, but again, just
Yeah.
pontificating on it a minute, what did that experience teach you about who you were becoming?
I realized the better version of me can be very authentic. And she's goofy and silly, and she does silly things, and she says, inappropriate things, and that's okay. So identity isn't built through declarations. It's built through evidence, often in private moments no one else sees.
Oh, amen to that. Okay, so Bree, how do we give the healthier response when we're going back to like that methodology a better chance of showing up when those deep, hard, challenging, emotional moments arrive?
Yeah, we talk about it a lot. Awareness is going to be the key, but planning for that moment of that weakness that seeps in when you're going into the freezer and you're ready to get the ice cream right out of it. One of the most researched tools for doing this is an implementation intention or if then plan. Instead of saying, I'm going to cope with stress differently, decide if I notice that I'm looking for food because I'm overwhelmed, then I'll take a 10-minute walk or call someone before deciding what to eat. Or if someone asks me for an immediate commitment, then I'll say, let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you tomorrow. A meta-analysis of 94 studies found that if then plans produced a medium to large improvement in goal attainment compared with an intention alone.
Oh, I mean, 94 studies are all saying the same thing. That's huge. And to reiterate, it's because we're making the decision before the emotion starts negotiating with us. The pause restores the choice. So after the walk or after the call or the journaling, you might still decide to eat the ice cream. I'm totally getting ice cream today because I want to. But now it wasn't used as a coping response or the only response that showed up to help bring the relief and do the work.
So every time we create that pause, we're giving the person we're becoming one more piece of evidence that they already exist. You don't become the person and then make the choice. You make the choice. And that is how the person is built.
I love that. Okay, this feels like a really good spot to throw in some reflection exercises because we talk a lot about actions in this podcast. So let's talk about some actions. So I want you to choose one response you tend to reach for when life gets difficult. Again, if you're driving, be safe, do this mentally. But then I want you to ask yourself, what feeling usually comes immediately before it? So again, think about a response that you tend to default to when life gets difficult. You're stressed, you're overtired, you're hungry, you're hangry, any of the things. What do you do? What do you default to? Now, ask yourself, what feeling usually comes before it. What does this response give me or temporarily remove for me? What could I do for 10 minutes that would address what I'm actually feeling? So now that we're asking ourselves these questions, I want you to complete this sentence. If I feel blank, then I will blank before deciding what happens next. Let me read that one more time for you, that sentence. If I feel blank, then I will blank before deciding what happens next.
Oh, love that. Those are some deep, thought-provoking questions. Well, let's each answer the same question for the listeners. What is one uncomfortable feeling you're learning to stay present with instead of immediately fixing it or escaping from it?
Ooh, okay. Mine is like disappointment of other people and people pleasing. So instead of immediately, like somebody else is disappointed in me in whatever form it is, I have learned to sit with it and understand that I don't have to react right away. Their emotions are not my responsibility, and I don't have to jump to fixing it or battling them because they're throwing daggers or whatever it may be. Like, I don't have to respond at all, quite honestly. And learning to stay present with that and acknowledge that they're feeling the way they're feeling. And I may or may not have done something to contribute to that. Either way, it's not my job to fix their emotional state that they're in.
Well, love that, Jen. I mean, I can definitely relate to that. Mine is definitely uncertainty. As someone who loves to build, create, solve problems, my instinct is to immediately find the answer or fix what's uncomfortable. But lately, I've been learning that not everything needs to be solved right away. Some things simply need to just be observed and witnessed. Some emotions need to be felt instead of fixed. And there are an infinite amount of possibilities and opportunities in uncertainty. And I'm leaning into that. And I've discovered that peace doesn't always come from having more certainty. And healing isn't about doing more. It begins by learning how to simply be present and aware of self, the mind, body, and soul. So what about you, Kat?
Well, you guys went so deep and amazing. I guess I'm going to be a little more pragmatic on my example, and it kind of riffs off the ice cream analogy. And the idea of like, do I have personal crutches to transition in the different phases of my life or to escape something? So my thought is that like in between the workday and the relaxation part of my life, that transition, where it's really easy for me to grab a clutch or a crutch in that time frame to modify my emotional and mental state. And it has been a long tradition of grabbing a glass of wine at the end of the day. It's a response that I learned from my dad, a good old German who would work really hard all day long, and he would grab that icy cold beer and he would drink it and go, like that's the reward I get for a long, difficult day, right? So it's really deeply embedded in my DNA to relax at the end of the day with mood altering chemical called wine. Anyway, I'm gonna put this into practice. And so instead, I'm gonna incorporate a transitional practice, a 10-minute transition before I automatically grab for that glass of wine. Now, I may still have a glass of wine. I'm not declaring anything right now, but it will be more intentional. That's going to be my goal. Like, to not do it out of a knee-jerk reaction, but to do it for whatever reason I may want to still have that glass of wine. So I think that's and it takes being aware, just to wrap up what you were saying, Bri, about yourself, mind, body, and soul, and what's motivating you and why it's motivating you to do certain things. So today we explored the person we need to become to live what we already know. But identity doesn't exist in isolation. Our routines keep rehearsing certain versions of us. Our relationships become accustomed to them. Our environments keep calling them forward.
Which means even a strong intention can collapse when everything around us continues cueing that old response.
That raises our next question. What if becoming the next version of yourself isn't only about changing what's inside of you, but it also requires changing what gets access to you?